I believe I saw in your investor deck that within the next 10, perhaps I guess it was 11 years by 35, it was over a 20x increase expected for nickel. Did I get that right?
Yeah, that's from Standard and Poor's. I mean,
Wow.
you can imagine that even though it's just a quarter of that, and we have to produce 5 times more nickel than we are right now, then
Mhm.
it's going to be very, very difficult for our mining industry to keep up to that.
Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is somebody you've met before. You've probably seen him at Deal Night. Perhaps you've read our articles. We have Greg Beischer, CEO of Alaska Energy Metals, going to talk to us about his projects in Alaska and actually Quebec as well. Greg, I've seen you recently, but it's good to see you again. Thanks for taking some time with us today.
Likewise, Kevin, pleasure.
I'd like to think by now a lot of people will be familiar with your story. Like I said, we've written about you. They've seen you at Deal Night. But perhaps if we get some new eyeballs here that don't know your story as well as someone else might, can you give us a bit of a rundown what it is you guys are all about?
Yeah, good. Thanks. The word is starting to get out. I think there is a little bit of a buzz going around about our company, and I'm happy with what we've been able to accomplish in just 9 months. But the focal point is our nickel project in Alaska. That's home base for me and has been for several decades now. And a geologist, mining engineer, and we're advancing what probably is a very, very large deposit of nickel with cobalt and copper and platinum group elements to go with it.
And I'm going to pat you on the back so that you don't have to do it yourself. In the last, since, what did I calculate? Since April, you guys have raised over $12 million. I think that number is actually closer to 15. I'll say two things. One, nobody raises money in the summer, or it's difficult to raise money in the summer. And it was extraordinarily difficult to raise money this summer. So hats off to you guys. That just wanted to put that at the beginning of the video so that people perk up and realize this is a real, this is a real deal. You're in Toronto right now being toured around by bankers. You said there's buzz on the street. I think that's an understatement. So I just wanted to preface the rest of this by putting that out there. Now let's go back. I want to talk about your background. So you've been a geologist for many, many years, but you have a special relationship with this project. Can we go back in time, talk a bit about how you got to this point?
You bet. My first career as a young geologist was with a great big nickel mining company called Inco, a Canadian institution that is now bought up by Vale. But that was my learning ground. But when I got enough experience, they sent me to Alaska because there was a spot that appeared to have geologic similarities to a place in Russia called Norilsk, which is the largest accumulation of nickel metal on Earth, and they wanted me to find something similar. And so, 1995, started working on the project. It was just a really grassroots green idea, but we discovered nickel and probably discovered a lot of it, but the concentration of metal or the grade for the 1990s wasn't going to cut it. But everything's different for nickel now. I've been able to reacquire the mineral rights to the exact same project I worked on all those years ago, and proving that actually it's quite a large deposit, and with nickel coming in such high demand, should be economic to extract it at quite a profit.
So as for somebody watching that doesn't really know the primary use cases of nickel, it was formerly stainless steel. Now, obviously, electric vehicles are the main, I guess, the excitement and the big growth driver of the future. Cool to see you've been working on this project so long. I guess they dropped you off in the Alaskan wilderness in '95 and said, "Don't come back without some nickel," and they're finally let you out.
Yeah, that's about it. But Anchorage is a pretty nice city to live in. It's a good sized place. So I've been very, very happy there and happy to explore all over the great state of Alaska.
Yeah, you are blessed. It's
What was your
gorgeous up
question
there.
again?
Well, actually, let's move on to what I wanted to talk about was I just wanted to give a background as to what the uses for steel are.
Yeah, right.
Nickel are, electric vehicles being the primary use case going forward.
Yeah, sure. Well, you're right. Historically, the main use for nickel has been the manufacture of stainless steel. Just mix alloy a little bit of nickel and chrome with the iron, and you've got beautiful stainless steel that we see all around us all the time. There's all kinds of uses for nickel, aerospace, aeronautical. It's just a very interesting and useful metal. But now, with the advent of electric vehicles, there's a whole new use for nickel, and some projections are that it'll actually surpass the consumption for stainless steel purposes. So it's a really big new use. There's about 29 kilos of nickel in every single average electric vehicle battery, and that doesn't, there's lots of different batteries now too, whether it's your phone or your computer. Anything rechargeable has got nickel in it, we call them lithium ion batteries, but interestingly there's about 5 times more nickel in it than lithium. So nickel's likely to become I would say the choke point metal for a more electrified society. And it's not just electric vehicles. Now we're starting to build grid scale battery storage plants for energy that's being created by wind farms or solar farms, so that we can store that energy for when the sun isn't shining or the wind isn't blowing. So nickel is coming into huge demand. The projections are really quite astounding. So far, Indonesia's been able to produce lots of nickel and expand its production capacity. So the price of nickel is actually still right soft right now, but that Indonesian nickel comes at a cost to the environment, and sort of negates the reason to put it in batteries so that we can save carbon going into the atmosphere by driving electric cars, because they're burning coal to smelt the nickel from the ore there, and they're just operations that are really hard on the environment, and that's why I believe that the United States should mine its own metals, where we do have the highest environmental regulation, where we do respect human rights and have good workers, working conditions, and better to mine it at home so that we're sure of the supply. The United States imports 100% of the nickel that it uses. And if it wants a nice smooth transition to a more electrified society, then it needs a steady supply. Car manufacturers are spending billions retooling their plants to build electric vehicles, and they're spending billions to build new battery factories all over the continent. But they're kind of coming at it backwards, because they're not sure that they've got a steady supply of the raw metals to do the manufacturing. So I think it's extremely important. As an American, I feel that our country is really vulnerable to metal supply chain disruptions. The country's lucky that Canada supplies half of the nickel that the United States consumes, but Canada's consuming a lot of nickel now too for its own electrical energy needs.
I believe I saw in your investor deck that within the next 10, perhaps I guess it was 11 years, by 35, it was over a 20x increase expected for nickel. Did I get that right?
Yeah, that's from Standard & Poor's.
Wow.
You can imagine that even though it's just a quarter of that, and we have to produce 5 times more nickel than we are right now, then it's going to be very, very difficult for our mining industry to keep up to that. And as a consequence, the mining industry is going to have to move towards mining what we call bulk tonnage, disseminated nickel deposits, these sort of large volumes of rock that are weakly mineralized but can be profitably mined because they're so continuous and homogeneous. That's the new wave of nickel mining, because high-grade, rich deposits are quite rare around the world and very difficult to find. And so to be able to meet these demand projections, we're going to have to mine that style of deposit, which is exactly what we've got in Alaska.
And considering the fact that nickel's now on the critical minerals list and the U.S. produces 0% of it, seeing what happened with energy, for example, with the U.S. formerly being a net an importer of energy, now being a net exporter, I wouldn't be surprised to see them strategically thinking long term to do something similar, perhaps for nickel, especially with such a robust demand forecast coming in.
I think we'll have strong government support for our project, but other similar energy metal projects. For example, a company that produces or is about to produce graphite in Alaska just got a big cash infusion from the Department of Defense. The Department of Defense in the U.S. certainly realizes how vulnerable the country is to metal supplies for their own consumption, specifically in defense applications, but also generally as a country. They get it. They understand how vulnerable the United States is. And I think that our administration, it's obviously pushing really hard for electrification, and it needs to also, help with permitting timelines. We've got the metals in the United States, and the federal government could do a better job of permitting timely mine applications. We don't want a reduction in the environmental protections, but what we do want as an industry is quicker decisions on mine development projects.
Mm-hmm. And I could probably take a guess at this, but I'm going to let you educate me regardless. Why Alaska? What's the reason? Why is that the frontier that we're so focused on?
Yep. Well, it's a great big frontier, and it hasn't been very well explored. It's all the same rocks as the Western United States, Western Canada, British Columbia. There's oodles of mines in British Columbia. It's all the same rocks in Alaska, but it's further north, and we don't have a lot of roads and railways and power lines. So big parts of the state they just don't have the logistical support, and so a mine has a high hurdle to get over because it would have to pay for a lot of that infrastructure. Our project, fortunately, is quite well located, right near paved highways, near a railway, near grid power. So we're in pretty good shape. But that's part of the reason Alaska hasn't been as developed as, for example, British Columbia, which has lots of mines.
Yeah, that makes sense. And okay, so let's continue zooming in on Alaska. Let's talk about the Nikolai project. Can you just tell us a little bit about the project? What's so unique about it? Why are we getting excited about this? Why are investors excited to the tune of $15 million?
Yep. Well, like I said, back in the 90s, I discovered nickel, and it turns out that even people that came along after me kept drilling holes and finding nickel, but it was all this one continuous layer, as it turns out, that is right at surface, just hidden under a little bit of glacial overburdened sand and gravel. But every hole that goes into it hits the mineralization, and it's about the same concentration. It's not a high concentration, around 0.35%, but it's very homogeneous, very continuous over a long distance, and it's thick mineralization, several hundred meters thick. And so you can imagine that once we've drilled this deposit off on a grid-style pattern so that we can quantify the amount of metal, it'll be a big deposit, and one that, if it turns out it's economically feasible to mine it, would last for a very long time.
Mm-hmm. And perhaps let's detour for a quick educational moment for viewers and myself, to be fair. I'm kind of curious to learn more about the process of going from a patch of dirt in the wilderness to an actual operating mine with cash flows? Like, what is the process in, like, how does that work? Educate
Yeah,
us.
no, it's quite the process, but I'll be
It
glad
is.
to explain it. Back in the 90s, INCO had done research. So you start with research. Lots of geological work's been done in the past, and so they looked at geological maps, publicly available information. That's always the very first step that a geologist takes. But then once we had noted that the rocks are similar to a place that elsewhere in the world hosts a big nickel series of nickel deposits, that encouraged them to use satellite detection, airborne geophysical detection, ways to try to image below the surface of the earth, ways to get clues. And for example, on the ground, then we'll use other types of geophysical sensors to image the earth, but collect soil samples, because the soil, there'll be bits of metals dissolved in that soil that can be a clue to the rocks underneath. Make geologic maps in the field, collect samples of rocks. But ultimately, in the end, we drill holes as geologists into the earth with a diamond-faced bit that allows us to collect a core sample, a core of rock from beneath the surface. And then we send half of that core away to an assay laboratory that can tell us exactly how much metal is in that rock. And then by drilling a grid of holes on an engineering basis, we can calculate the volume of the rock and therefore the tonnage of the rock and the amount of contained metal to build what we call a resource. And so we've already done that on our project with some of the drill holes we have available. And already we have over 1.5 billion pounds of nickel documented
Wow.
in the ground, but there's still a lot more to the process.
Wow.
Once we drill off enough rock to prove that there's a deposit of adequate size, we'll have to begin calculating whether or not we could actually extract that material at a profit. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of different things that will play into that profitability, such as how well can we recover the metals that are in the rock? What processes do we need to go through to get the metal liberated from the rock? And so all that feeds in, and all the while we have to earn our social license to operate, to prove that we're responsible, document existing conditions of the environment and the water before we even apply for the permits to build a mine. And there's many permits involved from many different layers of government in order to build a mine in the United States. So, we have excellent environmental regulation in the U.S. for mining operations, and all the mines in Alaska are really protective of the environment, very responsible operations. But yeah, it's quite the process to get that far. There's hurdles along the way. Lots of projects don't make it, but I think we've got the right project, the right time, with the right demand scenario for a very special metal.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that it's a big resource, and then you mentioned that it's 1.5 billion. Sorry. Not tons. It would be pounds, I suppose. 1.5
pounds. And for Canadians, that's roughly 700,000 metric tons of nickel contained within that rock. It's a fair-sized deposit already.
It's a fair size. Sounds like an understatement. That's very large. But perhaps to give some context, like something I find geologists love to do is they'll talking about ore grades, talking about sizing, kind of assuming that people know the context of what is big, what is small. So maybe if you know nothing about mining, is 1.5 billion pounds. That certainly sounds like an F load. How does that stack up in terms of other development size? Is that a truly huge deposit, or is that fairly average? Give us some context.
Yeah, it's a good start. There's a company called Canada Nickel that's developing in Canada a very similar deposit, and they've drilled off and outlined roughly 13 billion pounds of nickel, so about 10 times the size of ours so far, though I think we're rapidly going to catch up and perhaps exceed the size of that deposit in terms of its contained metal. So I would consider Canada Nickel's deposit a really big deposit of metal.
So that's a fairly good proxy, because if I recall, Canada Nickel's about market cap somewhere in 10 times yours, deposit 10 times yours. So I guess that's a very good comparison. To kind of work your way up towards a valuation like theirs, do you just need to prove that you have a bigger deposit, or is it more important to advance the deposit? What's kind of the key thing that's going to take you to that next step up in valuation?
Yeah, for sure. We want to prove that there's more potential ore there, that the deposit is bigger than we've currently proven.
Okay.
We think we will. There's enough historical drilling to guide us that it seems a strong likelihood that we can do that with just one more drilling program this coming summer. But we're actually still just finishing crunching all the numbers from the drilling we did last summer. So potential investors can look forward to perhaps a transformative announcement in the coming weeks, where we add to that 1.5 billion pounds of nickel, and it should be quite a bit more as a result of the drilling done last summer.
So 23, you had a drilling program going over the summer. How is that in size and scale compared to what you're looking to embark on in 2024, now that you have a lot more money?
Yeah, and we think that the project deserves a pretty aggressive approach. Last year was just one drill, 8 holes, just over 4,000 meters of drilling. We'd like to come back this summer with 4 drills and drill 4 times as much through the course of summer 2024.
So another quick educational moment. When you say drilling, like I see these images of these, it looks like a long tube of rock, essentially. And then we're talking about meters drilled. Like, tell me if I'm correct in saying when you basically punch a hole in the ground, come up with a meter of whatever the material is that considered 1 meter of drilling activity?
Exactly right. Yeah.
Okay. So
as I mentioned, it is a diamond-faced bit that's lubricated by water pressure that flushes away the cuttings, but the center of the bit is hollow, and it allows this core of rock to rise up through a tube at the bit face. And typically you drill about 3 meters per run and then pull it out.
I find mining so fascinating. Still lots to learn. So perhaps,
Kevin, I wish every person in the world could visit 1 or 2 mines to really understand what goes on and where the metals come from that are used all around us. I mean, people sometimes wonder, where does the electricity come from? Well, it comes out of the wall, but how to get there's a lot of metals that made that happen. And whether it's your phone or your computer, everything around us, if it wasn't grown, it came out of the ground. It was mined.
Yeah, no kidding. We need to have an appreciation for how we actually live this privileged lifestyle that we've become so used to.
Yeah.
So you've alluded to a few things already, but if we're going to mark off perhaps a few potential catalysts, I know you can only say so much based on what's disclosed, but any kind of things you would want to point out to investors, something they should be keeping a close eye on, getting ready for in the next, let's say, 12 months?
Yep. As I mentioned, we'll soon be able to announce an increase in the metal inventory in the ground as a result of the drilling that we did last summer. We've sent a lot of samples to the laboratory to tell us how much of those metals could we recover from the rock. It'll be an important consideration because typically you can't get all of it, and that'll have a bearing on the economics of a potential mine development. And then before we know it, we'll be drilling again, like I say, 4 drills, 15 or 16,000 meters of drill core to collect. And then producing the assay results through next fall from that work. And as long as things go the way I think they're going to go, we'll have quite a large metal inventory by the end of announced by the end of 2024. That should put us on the map of every major mining company in the world. And at that point, I suspect that it would make sense for us to bring in strategic investors, whether they're mining companies or metal processing companies or consumers of the product, such as a car or a battery company. Canada Nickel's blazing the trail for us that way. They've done a great job of securing strategic investments from mining companies, Anglo American and Agnico Eagle, but then integrated battery company, Samsung, has purchased an interest in that company because they want the guaranteed supply that would come from that mine in Canada. So we look to making similar strategic arrangements with other companies.
Fantastic. Well, we've discussed a lot of the reasons to be excited about this project. We've talked about your momentum, talked about the potential size of this resource. Would you like to leave investors watching this with a few bullet point notes that you want to drill, pun intended, drill into their mind before we depart this video?
Sure. Well, investing in metals stocks can turn big rewards. Over my career, I've seen people make a lot of money by investing in metals. The one thing you can be sure of is its cyclicity of metal prices. And usually if a metal is down, at some point its price is going to go up, and the companies exploring for that particular metal typically are leveraged, and their share prices climb very dramatically. And you've seen it recently. I know we were talking about it, that those who had invested in uranium companies have seen really great liftoff in the last just few months. And when the change occurs, it tends to happen quite rapidly. You'll see a 30% run up almost overnight, and now here we're a few months into a uranium bull market, and I've seen investors make 100% and more profits already. And so nickel price is not too strong right now, but the demand projection is huge. So be a bit of a contrarian and purchase stocks of metal companies that are maybe a bit out of favor in terms of their metal pricing right now, so that you can get that initial liftoff and then really profit.
I think that's an excellent example with uranium, because I've been following the space for years now and seeing the CEOs kind of preaching in a similar way that you are now about the demand, about all these considerations, and then it's going to happen, it's going to happen, it's going to happen, and then one day it just happens. And if you're not already positioned in there, it can be tough to get in. So it's almost like, just like you said, once the news is out, not to say it's too late, but it's a lot of the easy money has gone to somebody else if you've waited until that point.
Right,
so
where it's gone.
Finally seen that firsthand.
Yeah, I mean, I try to do this with my personal investing, is pick things that are out of favor, but I know will come back, and I just dollar forward averaging, picking up a few shares here and there, and all of a sudden your portfolio looks pretty good one day.
Yeah, certainly. Well, I would be very excited to see another one of those stories here, and this is certainly shaping up to look that way. Investors at home, if this is a stock that's perhaps not on your watch list, get it on there right away. AEMC.V if you're Canadian. If you're American, it trades over the counter. AKEMF. If you guys have any questions, reach out to us anytime. We love chatting about this stuff. Greg, thank you so much for sharing some of your knowledge with us. This is a story I'm excited about. We're going to keep covering you, following the story, and looking forward to seeing this be another highlight in the portfolio.
Super. Thanks a lot, Kevin. Always great to talk to you.
Thanks, Greg. Pleasure's mine.